Thank you very much, John. Those that don't know me, I'm an archaeologist. I work for the Ministry of Defence. It surprises people that the Ministry of Defence in the UK has archaeologists, but we do have an awful lot of land, about 1% of the UK mainland, 770 odd scheduled monuments and parts of 9 World Heritage sites. So it's cheaper to employ me than to pay for damaging monuments. Also, I help get their training facilities. Now, this particular project came out in a bit of a strange way, really, in many ways. I can partially blame Roger for that, Roger Day. I've always wanted to dig a B-17. We were doing some examinations of aircraft and how you do the archaeology of aircraft. It's quite an unusual thing, and setting guidelines, and that sort of thing we have to do with the Ministry of Defence. We issue all the licenses for excavation of these air crashes, and Roger told me there was a B-17 from the Schweinfurt raid that came down not too far from here. But when we were talking about this, he showed me a museum collection that he'd sort of been one of the leading lights on putting together at Littlecote House, and that was all connected with the 101st Airborne. And I must admit, it's to my shame, being a Wiltshireman, I didn't know the Easy Company were based here. I know, it's terrible. Sorry. I've watched the TV series. I love the television series. So it's appalling that I didn't know that it was very close to my doorstep, that these guys were based for the longest period of any time in their existence in the Second World War. I'm also based on Salisbury Plain and the main military training area, and I know that Easy Company trained there. You see tree carvings, you see ammunition lying around. Lots of Americans went through Salisbury Plain, they went through the village of Imber, they trained on the west. There are lovely pictures of Eisenhower with the American armored divisions by Sherman tanks, but Easy Company were there as well, at a place called Beecher's Barn. And so that's where the germ of the idea came from. And then I came to the village, was absolutely bowled over by how beautiful it was, how friendly the people here are, how good the cakes are. And that's something I think the Americans remember as well. Every anecdote and reminiscence talks about your local lardy cakes, which seems to be a real feature. And I thought, therefore, it would be a perfect opportunity to have a look to see if there was anything at all remaining of the Easy Company campsite. Because the people I work with are military veterans who've been in more modern conflicts, Afghanistan, Iraq, Falklands, stuff that the British military have fought in over the last 40 years. And we've done this thing called Operation Nightingale to use archaeology as a mechanism for their recovery. So we thought we'd have a look. There might have been nothing left, in which case I'd have had bored military people for 10 days. And that's an alarming thing, because they need occupying, they're inventive. You need to find things for them to do. So it was a bit of a risk, but hopefully we would find something. They're probably the most famous military unit of the Second World War. I was trying to think of a British equivalent that was as well known in this country as Easy Company or the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne is in the States. I couldn't really think of one. Maybe 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters. But this is a much more small, cohesive unit, so I really don't know. Lots and lots of books, leaflets, as you're hopefully aware of. There's the television series. There is so much of a resource that you can look for to see if there's elements that we could have a look at archaeologically. And we're using all the traditional archaeological techniques, and you'll see that throughout the evening. So this is this thing, Operation Nightingale Archaeology. That's the thing I run within the Ministry of Defence. In fact, the trademark is owned by the Secretary of State for Defence. He won't know it, but he does own it. And everywhere you look, there are little hints about the lives of those men from the 1940s here. And I think we all recognise this from the side of the crown. I think I'm right in saying the image of the classic blue circle plaque going on the side of the pub, letting you know about the band of brothers. You always meant to show a map when you do these sort of presentations, and usually it's ripped out of Google Earth or the Ordnance Survey, but I thought this one was really charming because it encapsulates a lot of Wiltshire, a lot of elements here. You've got Chiseldon, Oldbourne, Ramsbury. We in this room are all very familiar with it, but it shows the kind of close proximity of so much military archaeology. And then you've got the Chiltern Foliat site, which is the jump school where a lot of these paratroopers did a lot of their training. And then you've got bits of the Hearts and Minds campaign going on in the bottom left, with the British gentlemen clearly not getting anywhere near the pub because of all the American guys being served. So our mission on year one in, gosh, back in 2019, I think it was to locate the hut camp of Easy Company. And that sounds easier said than done, because I had heard stories I knew about your big dig project that you'd had here with metal detecting. You hear stories of it in a football pitch, which has been leveled, which is never good for archaeology when bulldozers come in and grade an area. So we were a little skeptical that there would be anything, but it's always worth a risk. These things are always worth the punt. If you don't do it, you won't find it. We thought it was worth a go. So we wanted to find evidence for Easy Company. These are, of course, the actors, but the lovely thing is the link to the real people. And that's what archaeology is about. It's about people. It needn't be 101st Airborne. It could be your Roman site locally. It could be, I don't know, the Bronze Age components that you've got, which are really important. But it's that recurring thread of humans and people and their use of the landscape and what they've left behind. So another map. This one actually was produced by one of the veterans of Easy Company. I think Neil Stevens, who's written a lot about the subject of Easy Company, provided us with this. There's an Easy Company veteran wrote this from memory, which is just phenomenal. And memory is a curious thing, because the gap of time means you quite often forget things or get things not quite right. And so it's a tricky thing to use academically as empirical evidence. But this has actually proved to be a real goldmine. It has been incredibly good. And the key thing from my point of view, and can you see my arrow here? These are the sites of many of the huts that we wanted to look for, because these are, from his recollection, where Easy Company were based on the sports pitches. You've got F here, Fox Company. So we'd call that Foxtrot Company, but Fox Company from an American point of view, and Easy Company here. So you've got RX, that's Red Cross. If you look at the legend, Red Cross, we think that's probably Stephen Sowerby's hut. So probably that's where we think his hut came from. ESQ, that's Easy Sergeant's Quonset. And then these are all Quonset huts. It's Nissen huts. Americans know them as Quonset huts. So that is the row of huts we thought we would like to see if there was anything left whatsoever on the sports pitches. So this is our 2019 season on the sports pitches. And as I said, it's all about people and individuals. And we're trying to trace the footsteps of some of the most famous military figures from the war. In this case, Carwood Lipton. Carwood Lipton was a sergeant in Easy Company. He gets a field promotion in Bastogne in the campaign, which you know, the Battle of the Bulge in this country, because he performed heroic duties, so he becomes an officer. But this one, he's a sergeant. In fact, this is Carwood Lipton on the far right of the image, standing in front of the huts. So that's the Red Cross building here. This is the Quonset hut we thought we'd have a go and see if we could find. You'll also notice the squarish hut here. That's a glider crate. So these chaps are all paratroopers, but a lot of the airborne elements were using Waco gliders, and the British were using a different form of glider. They're using a Horsa glider, but they came over in kit form in those things and then formed houses. The great thing is, it's not that long ago. So the landscape hasn't changed hugely. And if you stand in the middle of the football pitch, just beyond the penalty spot, and you look up to the hillside, it's still the same, and those trees are still there. Now, there's another image of Carwood Lipton here on the right, and his acting partner on the left. And we keep referring to the actors in it, and we'll come to the reason for that later on. Being a military site, and in the 20th century, there's a lot of good air photography, and that's a huge starting point for any archaeological project. You go to the National Records for Historic England, and fortunately for us, they're based in Swindon. So really, really close, and you can put up your grid square. You say, I'd like to know everything you've got from this particular grid reference. You send it to them, and 2 weeks later, they will provide you with all the air photography they've got. You can just go and have a look at it. It's a brilliant resource. This particular site has been photographed many, many times by both the Royal Air Force and, in this case, the US Army Air Force. And this is the field we're looking at. So lots and lots and lots and lots of huts, as you can see. And the hut we were particularly looking at was this one here. So air photographs from the 1940s. Not so promising from Google Earth. As you can probably see, not a hut inside. The key thing you can see the pictures here, but it is this thing here. That's the goalposts, and that's to locate yourself from an audience point of view in the room. You'll know exactly where we are. Looking farm lane. There's the goalposts. That's where we were going to put our tents when we were camping, and we've been very lucky. Touch wood. The 2 Mays we've been here, it's been quite nice weather. But all the rest of my team have now been buying camper vans up, so I think they're a little bit nervous that third time may not be so lucky. From a surviving buildings point of view, you saw nothing really on the sports pitches. There are still a couple of structures that do relate to the American presence. This was the cookhouse, still there today. I didn't look this evening, but I presume it's still today. And then if you go to Stephen Sowerby's place, there's one of the huts that's been moved away, and you can see the corrugated sheets, or the wriggly tin as we call it. But from our point of view, what's really nice about that is there are lots of fixtures and fittings on the metalwork that will provide a link to when we're excavating. We hoped that we'd be able to have a reference point. So if we're finding things on the sports pitch, we might be able to relate it to what Stephen had in his particular hut. Again, if you've ever watched Time Team, if not, hopefully you will in the future, I'll come to that. They always start with geophys, and it looks like often a person walking around with a Zimmer frame completely lost in the field. Or in this case, this is Dave, who's got what we call a towed array, or a push array in this case, and he's got 6 magnetometers, which measures the magnetic resistance of the soil and provides a computer printout at the end, which will show what's buried underneath the ground. The goalposts, for your reference again, and you may recognize the hillside with the trees on from the Carwood-Lipton photograph. And that was, this photograph's pretty much taken where the Carwood-Lipton image was. So that was the first stage. We've done the aerial photographs. We've done the geophysical survey. It's what we call desktop survey. You're bringing all these elements together because you don't want to put a spade in the ground just haphazardly. You've got to base your trenches on where you think the archaeology is like to be. So that's Dave doing his work. And these are his results, laid over a pretty similar map to the one I showed you earlier. Some of it is not archaeological, as you'd expect. This big white rectangle at the top here, that's the goalposts. You can't do magnetometer around a goalpost because that's quite magnetic. You get a very big reading, but it's pointless. The big black and white element on here, that's a pipeline. That's how they always show up. There's a big bar magnet effect. And then these big splodges are where we believe your floodlights used to be on the football pitch. So that's not what we wanted to see, but what we sort of expected. What we did want to see, however, are these rectangles. Can you all see these? So these, we were pretty confident were going to be at least the bases of the hut camps. So those are the foundation levels for where the Quonset or the Nissen huts were going to be, where Easy Company and Fox Company were. The sketch that we showed you earlier, that would be where Fox Company was, to the south of the football pitch, and then by the goalposts is more where Easy Company were located. So given we were looking for Easy Company, looking for the famous Banda brothers, we put our first trench in 2019 up at the very top end, right in the corner. There are a series of dots. Can you see those? A series of dots. Now, we'll come to those later. So that's what we wanted to find. Drawing it up a bit more clearly, goalpost here, we did a test pit here. My co-director, Dan, was insistent we did a test pit. So we did do a test pit to evaluate what that little strip was there, but this was the main focus of our attention, trench 1. In nearly all of these images, I'm doing no work, so I've cut those out. I tend to be one getting my photographer Harvey Mills took most of these photographs. He's superb, and he's put together a photo journal of the particular field. But these are 2 British veterans of recent campaigns. On your right is an infantryman from the Rifles. On your left is an artilleryman, and what they're doing is they're evaluating metal detecting signals right between our excavation trenches. It's a good job they did it. Now, all those dots I showed you on the geophysics turned out to be these things. These are little concrete posts on which the corrugated iron of the hut were tied down onto to form the foundations. Little squares of concrete, and the reason they were so clear on the geophysical signal was because each one of them has a little metal spike in the middle. You couldn't make it better for geophysics. It was almost as designed as if we'd laced the site. Concrete pads with each of them having a little metal spike. You can see one here, there's another one here, another one here. And they also had this material. It's a waterproof membrane. So you've got your corrugated half circle sitting on the concrete pads, and they've tried to put a layer of waterproofing on. All the anecdotes from the Americans say how cold these were, and the mattresses were simply basically an empty mattress you stuffed with straw, put on the floor, and they had a pot-bellied stove in there. I think that must have been quite miserable over Christmas. It must have been very cold indeed, especially if you're coming from Toccoa and in places like Georgia. It must have been very cold. So here's the stripped area of our fieldwork in 2019. You can see the post pads all here, and you can see the dark stain is where that waterproof membrane was. A huge relief, a huge result that we've got the archaeology, because it could have been bulldozed away. There's a lot of soil at the top end of that site from where the bulldozer had leveled the pitch. In fact, that protected a lot of the archaeology and it collected it there. But nonetheless, it's still preserved. All of those items you can see on that picture are still there today. So if you wanted to go and re-excavate it, that is still there. And I think that was a key thing from our point of view at the start, was to provide the village with data about what is still there, that you still do have these hut bases of Easy Company there, and they're really important because it's such an important unit. Harvey has then superimposed the outline of the image of Carwood Lipton's hut on top of the post pads, just to give you the dimensions of this thing and how it fits perfectly with what we've excavated. Dan's test pit was perhaps less exciting, but nonetheless gave us the information we were after. It revealed the hardcore packing of a hut path foundation. So these things in the winter got very wet and very muddy, and these were the paths that went between the buildings. We think with probably concrete slabs on top of them. And the stories I've been told is that they were removed at the end of the war and went into the pond locally. I might be wrong on that, but that's the story I was told. I don't intend to dig your pond. Yeah. You may be pleased to hear. Otherwise, you end up with that sort of situation. So that's another American hut locally. And you can see it's an absolute quagmire, and that sort of path with the slabs on top of it is to alleviate just that sort of situation. And one of the key things from our point of view is working with you all as a community. I'm sure many of you came along each May and visited us, and many of you did provide us with cakes. We ended up with almost cholesterol poisoning with that much cake. It was wonderful, wonderful. But it's key for us is to work with the community. It's a delight to work with the local children here, to have people like Ethel visiting our site. She's a lower right, and just to be able to come and visit, and for us to be able to show what we found. And the people that we get quite often, I think you can see John in that one, but there are other people, local people that are doing guided tours. I get some of my veterans telling you about things.
Ethel on the right, the gentleman in the middle is Derek. He died a couple of months ago, and he was really looking forward to coming up this year.
Was he? Yeah. And that's the passage of time, isn't it? And the thing is, with the Second World War, I mean, it's recent, but it's still beginning to pass away from living memory. It's incredible. I was working on a First World War site in Belgium, a First World War trench. It was excavating it on the day that Harry Patch died. And that was the last living memory of a fighting soldier from the trenches, and it's passed from living memory to archaeology and history. It's a strange experience. Now, we worried whether we were going to get any fines, and we really needn't have. In fact, we've now filled the Heritage Centre with all manner of rust over the last few years. Colossal. I think there's some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stories, and not just related to the Americans. I really like, difficult to make out, but the lower right corner of that image, it's a load of crisp packets, and some of them are older than me. They are pre-decimalization crisp packets, but they still survive. Lots of crisps that aren't made anymore, but it was great when the kids came, because you could tell them about the effects of plastics and all sort of current issues which archaeology can show. The only reason that survived, it was higher up than the American stuff, is because the covering that the bulldozers had made when they'd leveled the pitch. We found marbles again on the bottom row. And it's all connected with the people that used those particular buildings after the Americans had left. We call them the squatters. Their houses had been bombed out in the cities, and they were in these huts prior to getting council housing. But of course, what we really wanted to do is connect ourselves with the Americans, and if we could, paratroopers. And I think we would have been happy with anything, an American button, something that was demonstrably American, and in fact we did probably a little bit better than that. This is one of the items we found from the hut region. It's part of a reserve parachute. So if you're looking for paratrooper, that's probably about as good as you're going to get, isn't it? So part of a parachute. Lots of these have turned up over the couple of years that we've been here. The one on the left is the one we found archaeologically, and the right is just a comparator. These are clips for Garand rounds. These hold the American ammunition that go into the Garand rifles. I think we've got one on the table at the front if people want to see later on. And they make a very distinctive pinging noise as well when you're out of ammunition. And it's always picked up on the films and television shows. If you hear it go ping, that means you need to put more ammunition in. There was some debate as to whether that was a bad thing, because the Germans could also listen to the ping and realize you're out and need to reload. But a lot of these things have turned up. It's not a British thing. The British were in these huts before the Americans, British Army, and they have a very different charger for their rifle. So this was an American thing. So we've got parachute, we've got charger for the rifles, real cream, and this gets you back to the people, I think, which is quite fun. When I first came here, when I was given the tour of the village, I was told about the memorial hall that the dance floor was worn out by the Americans doing, I think, should we say hearts and minds? Hearts and minds. And I like to think this is a GI wanting to look really good before he goes out and meets all the local girls with his jar of Brill cream. I am very well aware there were local marriages, including Lieutenant Spears, who's one of the big names of Easy Company, photograph of him getting married at your church here. And the Americans, of course, paid for the floor to be redone at the end of the war, didn't they? So this is, I think, part of that human story. It's not all about fighting. A lot of it is about just being young men, I think. Other American things, if we start on the right, Pepsi Cola. So this wasn't a Coke village, this is a Pepsi village. So there's a bottle of 1940s Pepsi. In the middle, something to demonstrate that these men knew suffering before they went to the fighting, spam tin keys. Not a big fan myself. I mean, maybe I'm in a minority, but not a big fan. And then on the left, something that was extraordinary. This is a British threepenny bit with an American round put in there just to show the gauge of the hole. There's no sniper that is that good that could shoot a coin that accurately through the middle. I think that's frankly treasonable to shoot the king, but there we are. So you've got this little hole through the coin that is exact gauge of an American rifle round. I think pretty certainly what this demonstrates is somebody's put the coin on top of their rifle and fired it. Just because they can. And I did say a bored soldier is a dangerous and an inventive thing. So that's why we wanted to make sure they found things. Nonetheless, it's all part of that life. Now, I showed you Paul, one of our infantrymen earlier on, doing some metal detecting, and he came up with this thing, which took a bit of time before we immediately recognized it, but it's in fact the handle of an emergency parachute. American design. It's still got little bits of the red paint on it. John's holding it up for those in the room. That really was a start find, because this, as an archaeologist, you're trying to link about what events were happening that are related to this. It's been pulled. So was it pulled in Normandy? Was it pulled on D-Day? And the chaps brought it back as a souvenir and, a lucky survival, because if this thing hasn't worked, he's going to die. Last minute thing. Has it been just used in training? Has it been mucked about with in the barracks and he's hidden it so that the sergeant major doesn't have a go at him? We'll never know, but you can build stories around it. And that's the beauty of it all. What we can say is it's an American parachute pull. So we've got parachute pull, parachute silk, and the Garand clips as well. If you go to the woodlands nearby, you'll see bits of training traces. The Americans didn't just sit here for 6-7 months before they went off to fight. They were practicing all the while. They were practicing their jumps at Chiltern Foliot. They're practicing their military techniques and digging in foxholes and positions and attacking locations with bazookas, all the sorts of things they're going to need to refine. And the little brown area here is one of those foxholes. They're on Salisbury Plain as well. The guys metal detected it, and I think they found bits and pieces in that. But nonetheless, if you watch the TV series, which is a pretty good replicator of what was going on in the Ardennes forest, these sorts of positions were crucial for understanding what they were going to face in theatre later on. And as I said, soldiers, when they're bored, will do various things. There are various things that soldiers will always do. Drink is often one of them. If you read that book, John, there's quite a few other things they'll do, which I can't really mention. Graffiti is another one. whether it's on walls. You look at the D-Day wall in Southampton with lots of GIs who've carved their names onto the bricks. They'll also do it on trees. Now this is quite a fun one because it's got CL, SC, USA. I think the more optimistic in our team, we're tracing that as CL, Carwood Lipton, USA. SC, did he come from South Carolina? Well, the answer is he didn't come from South Carolina, and it may well probably isn't Carwood Lipton, but nonetheless, it's an American who has carved his name onto the trees in the war. And that's a really nice human touch. And you're putting your hands literally on top of those that fought in those incredible days of the 1940s. Another hut that does survive, but not in the right location, was this old stable block that used to be on your village green. It's now a Littlecote House. And from my point of view, this is great because it gives the evening entertainment to lots of my veterans, and Roger and his team are really kind to show us around and give my guys a chance to see other things locally. So Littlecote House with its Roman mosaic, its headquarters company building, the little museum there, and this hut. The other one, of course, is in America, and Stephen and his dad moved it over some years ago. But it's to give that sort of choreography that provides entertainment to my team in the evenings. And here's the Airborne Museum within Littlecote House. Another key component is the morale piece. A lot of my participants have served in some pretty visceral engagements. And one of the key things is to be able to decompress, to be able to talk to one another, to have good company, just have a couple of beers, spend a lot of money in the Chinese takeaway locally, and just to chat to one another. And these people have often not met one another beforehand, but they'll sit around and just chat, and then they'll open up. And it's an incredible piece of therapy, really, for many of these individuals. They'll sit around and talk round and be in a cathartic environment whilst making incredible finds. And that's the whole ethos, I think, of Operation Nightingale, of getting good archaeology, but doing well by the people involved themselves. Now, it's also been on television a couple of times. Now, the reason Alice is like this is because the finds on her table before this were the Staffordshire hoard. So it's a 7th century hoard of gold, of garnets, of jewelry, and I covered it with rust about 2 minutes later. So that's the reason she looks like that. But after that programme, a gentleman who lived in Oldbourne in 1943 and 94 wrote to the television programme saying how interesting it was because he lived in Oldbourne. And he and his brother were sort of adopted by the Americans, and they can remember on June the 6th, 1944, D-Day, coming into the American camp, finding it utterly abandoned and collecting all sorts of ammunition. So very, very strange. But the really lovely thing is that this chap had a little toy monkey called Switzy the monkey. And Switzy the monkey was given various bits of ephemera by the Americans while they were here, including, as you can see on the jacket here, an airborne patch and a screaming eagle, the badge of the 101st Airborne. So they were given to this chap by members of Easy Company in 1943, and they're probably worth an absolute fortune. So Switzy did visit us later on last year. In fact, he came up to site, and now in his little jacket pocket, there's an obituary in the Telegraph newspaper of Dick Winters, the commanding officer of Easy Company. And I think that's an incredible story that television has enabled. There's all sorts of things with Band of Brothers. We always have a Dig t-shirt. So here's our effort for 2019. And of course, they've got a brewery. 506 is not quite so easy. So that's 2019. And the results were so good, we were going to come back in 2020. And then COVID hit. So that did not happen. We also didn't come back in 21. But 2022, we were finally able to return. And so we chased another individual. This is a chap called Forrest Guth. And he was from Pennsylvania on the east of the United States. And he's the chap sitting on the bicycle here. So we thought we'd try and chase Forrest Guth's hut. We thought we'd try and find this particular hut directly behind the bicycle. And that was our next target for 2022. We did a little reenactment scene from two of our veterans. The chap on the bike is an Australian. Very, very strangely, his grandmother used to live in the village of Oldbourne. And he didn't know that until he turned up here. It's the building right next to the church. He didn't have a clue until he rang his parents, said, I'm in Oldbourne. He said, well, your grandmother lived there. astonishing. Anyway, so that's Scotchy, who's an Australian infantryman, and the chap posing most uncomfortably at the front of the bike, he's an ex-American airman who now works for Cotswold Archaeology. So these are two of our vets posing for our photograph. Now, Forrest Guth is this individual here. This is on the morning of D-Day, this is 6th of June. This is at a place called Saint-Marie-de-Mont in Normandy, and their duty is to go here and help protect the Utah landing beaches. So these are guys on the morning of D-Day. The three in the back are American Infanteers. Ones at the front are all American paratroopers from Easy Company. Well, back to our geophysical survey and the air photographs. Where we were in 2019 was this building, and this is the one behind Forest. And so on our geophysical survey, this is where we were. You see all the dots. That's where we were first time. And we thought we'd go to this one. Again, there's a few dots here with a pathway leading up to it. So that was our main target. We didn't think we'd get anything near as good as 2019 because parachute silk, parachute pull, very, very difficult. So we're laying our excavations on top of it. So we did 2 digs. One here in 2022, one here 2019, and then over here is where we did a measured metal detecting survey. Basically, we put a grid out and we did metal detecting and pinpointed every single find within a 5-meter grid so we could inform future surveys and future excavation work. There's the map of it. So our survey is here. With all this is where we did all our metal detecting. This is where we did some ground penetrating radar. It's a new technique for geophysics from our project's point of view, with some great results, and then the traditional archaeology up here. There's a drone shot of the 2022 field work, and it's pretty similar to the other site that we had, the other huts. You can see all the little post pads that we had before, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, more up here, but they're missing from here. It should have been here. And I think the bulldozer has taken those away. There was a big piece of concrete lying in the middle of the hut. So I think that has had some degrading effect over the years, but nonetheless, there's still a hut base there. Makes you think that whole row, you've got hut bases, which is just phenomenal. It's like having a Roman marching camp. It's really, really exciting, just a bit more modern. All the little white blobs here, you can see, these little white things here, these are little lolly sticks, you put them with vegetables to mark out what sort of vegetable it is, and that says there's a metal reading here. So every single one of those had a piece of metal probably connected to the hut. So that's a lot of work, a lot of work. Those are our hut pads, very similar again, and you've got these numbers on so we know exactly which is which when we come to do the report, again with the tar paper on and again with the metal signal on. So you can see that's the configuration of the hut just behind Forrest Guth. This one did also have a drainage pipe, probably not entirely in situ, but nonetheless, the first sort of structural component that Cassie found leading up into the corner of the building. That's still there, actually. And again, not maybe wildly exciting. It's a piece of corrugated iron, Wrigley tin. But when you say that's a piece of Wrigley tin from a hut the Easy Company lived in, it becomes a bit more exciting. So you know the Magritte image, this is not a pipe, because an object is actually a lot more embedded with a story and narrative, its own biography. And then when you hear that biography, it becomes much more important. If I was to bring out a piece of corrugated iron to an antiques fair and say, would anyone give me £1 for this? You'd get no, you get laughed at. But if I said this comes from a hut used by Easy Company, I could sell it for hundreds, genuinely. It's the same piece of iron, but it's got a story. And the items we found with that hut were also interesting. A little escutcheon and a door key. And of course, we did try it and they don't fit. They are not for the same thing, but nonetheless, they were both in the same hut doorway. On the other side of the sports pitches where Fox Company were based, the huts look as though they were slightly better built. They're not on concrete pads, they're on these brick footings. So they're actually quite well made. And there is a book about fighting Fox Company, and they do talk about quite garish coloured interiors of these buildings. They were painted, and these brickwork foundations were put up to stop a lot of the effects of flooding and poor weather. So hopefully that's what we may see if we come back, when we come back in May. Now, I showed you all those images from the first year. Second year was bonkers. The amount of finds we had was it was ridiculous. This thing, and this is from the hut area, it's a little lead pig. And I think that's used by a little children's toy farm. It's got pink paint on it, and it's back to that story of the people using those huts after the Americans have left. And it's that reuse of structure from the squatters' point of view. And I think it's charming. And kids quite often aren't represented in the archaeological record. We'll say it's ritual or it's a votive deposit. And often I think it's going to be kids' toys. And this pig, I think, is one of my favorite finds. We did find a lot of military stuff. We found British ammunition, this being there before Americans. But we also got these things are really well preserved. These are special health salts in a bottle. A shaving brush. We did find a razor as well. The shaving brush was really comforting because it does say free from anthrax. I'm not sure I really want to find anything with anthrax, but that's free from anthrax. I'm presuming it meant it was badger bristle or something like that. I don't know. Sterilized and free from anthrax. It wasn't in my initial risk assessment, so I'm pleased that we had that. Shaving cream. It's a British shaving cream, Shave X cream. Doesn't mean to say it was used by the British. Quite often, you know, the Americans will buy local material, but you can still see the writing on it. The preservation is really, really fascinating. A wooden handled penknife. British ammunition. So we've pinpointed the fact that we know from research that's been done by people like Cassie that the British were here, but it's nice to have ammunition to prove it. This is a British Second World War charger. All those bullets are now being deactivated. The bullets have been broken off the cartridges, so they are completely safe. We do have a bomb disposal person that works with us, but happily he's not been hugely engaged. Another find that is here tonight, that's the top of an American smoke grenade. So these things, you know, you give yourself cover by firing the pin of the smoke grenade, gives you cover, and then you go in. So these are worn usually on your tunic. This is a fun thing too. This is two sides of the same bus token. It says good for one fare, and it's from the Howard Bus Line, Inc. Howard Bus Line are based in Atlanta, Georgia. And when you think that the parachute training done by the 506 was done in Toccoa, also in Georgia, I like to think this is one of the guys from the parachute regiment who's got a day off. He's planning to have a go around town, and he's not been able to use all of his tokens. So he's taken it back and he's lost it in a field in Wiltshire. Probably not valid anymore. Nice to try it, wouldn't it? I have no idea what that is. I think it's a Zippo. We did find a lighter, and I think that's it. And it's sometimes with the archaeological things we find, it's not always clear. And then somebody has a eureka moment and say, I know exactly what that is. And I'm pretty sure that's the Zippo. You can't argue with that, however. That's an American brass button. So if I came to the site in 2019 and asked if there's one thing I wanted to find, it was something that we could prove that the Americans were here. That's it. I mean, you see that image on the left behind every presidential presentation, don't you? The American eagle, and that's a really nice dress button from the Americans here. And then you've got all these different fixtures and fittings that we found lots of, and Harvey's put this together to show all the bits that we found from an American paratrooper's webbing. There's a standard American issue, all these things lying in your field, or were lying in your field. They're now lying in your heritage centre or on the table over there. More of these Garand clips. So those hold the bullets used by the paratroopers. And then we get into the real business end of these things. Now, we've traced American paratroopers. We found their Hearts and Minds campaign. But this is a really special item. John's holding it up for those in the room. When we found this, one of our metal detectorists found this, a chap who's was a Royal Engineer, and the Yorkshire Regiment infantryman knew what this was straight away, and there was a real whoop from sight. This is a cricket, also known as a clicker. Now, if you've ever seen the film The Longest Day, or watched the Band of Brothers, this is the means of identification for Easy Company on D-Day. So if you land in the field and you don't know where you are and you don't know who's approaching you, you get this cricket and you click it once. And then you reply with 2 clicks. And those things were only issued to the guys on the morning of D-Day, and they only ever really used them on D-Day. They weren't used on Operation Market Garden. This is a one-use item, 6th of June, 1944. So one of our paratroopers has come back and presumably just dropped it in the hut, made by Acme. I thought there was only somebody that made things for Wile E. Coyote. But no, Acme made this, and they were really excited because these things are incredibly rare. So you've got an item there that was used potentially on D-Day. Certainly was there, issued for D-Day. So incredible. We've got stuff linking to paratroopers, stuff linked to D-Day. Really, really exciting. And then weirdly, it got even better. So you're standing on the other side of the field and you're hearing whoops of joy and excitement. One of our infantrymen said, "I found a dog tag." And I thought, how likely is this? Or are you having a laugh with me and it's going to be a real dog tag with like Fido or a Blackie or whatever written on it? No, this is a real dog tag. It looked almost too good to be true. It's pristine condition. And they're really informative items, these dog tags, because not only do they have the name on it, this case, Richard Blake, he's got his service number on it. You've got his tetanus jab dates, 43, 44, so his tetanus is up to date. You've got C, lower right, he's a Catholic. Quite incredible, all this data on there. And then you can go straight onto the image. I don't know what we did before the internet. With the signal you're picking up in the sports pitches, within seconds, the team have been Googling his name, and that's who he is, Richard Blake. 21 years old when he's living in Oldbourne. He jumps into Normandy on the day of D-Day. So he survives D-Day, he comes back to Oldbourne. He then jumps into the Low Countries and Operation Market Garden, into the Bridge Too Far campaign, where he has a severe hand wound, and that's his war over. He's medically discharged from the military. So he survives the war. But you got a little picture of this man who lived in your fields in the 1940s, and that's an extraordinary and really rare moment in archaeology, that you can actually link a face and a person and a name to what you're excavating. Quite incredible. So there we are. We had the perfect find. You were never going to beat that. And then about 2 minutes later, we did. So Cassie then started whooping, and I thought, no, this got to be a wind up. This is never, you're not going to get two. One is as rare as hen's teeth, and two, I don't know what the double of hen's teeth is, but exponentially more unlikely. But it was indeed another dog tag. Carl F. Fenstermaker, his service number. Tetanus seems to be slightly out of date, 42, 43. P, he's a Protestant. Again, the image was found straight away. Carl Fenstermaker, Carl L. Fenstermaker. So his middle initial is wrong on his dog tag. Would that explain why it's been bent and chucked away? Possibly. I don't think we'll ever know. The really incredible thing for this one, though, Richard Blake was in Able Company. We have no records of Able Company being necessarily in the sports pitches, but they must have been because the dog tag's there. But Carl Fenstermaker was indeed one of Easy Company. He's mentioned in the book Band of Brothers. Doesn't feature in the TV series, and that's an extraordinary thing because he's one of the two pathfinders. These are the guys that go in before the paratroopers. So before D-Day even happens, these guys go in to mark out the landing zones. There are only two of them in all of Easy Company, and he was one of them. Drops his dog tag or chucks his dog tag away in your football pitch. Now, Carl Fenstermaker sort of drops in on D-Day, sort of. He goes in at the start, but his Dakota, his Skytrain, is shot down into the English Channel. So he's into the English Channel, and like Forrest Guth, with whom he signs up, he's mates with Forrest Guth, the guy on the bicycle, friends with him. They all come from Pennsylvania. He's Pennsylvania Deutsch, so he's a German speaker. Imagine if he's in the Channel, he sees a ship coming towards him and he thinks it's German Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. So he hails them in German, say, come and pick us up, come save us. Except it's not German Kriegsmarine, it's Royal Navy. And he's shouting at them in German. So he's promptly arrested briefly for being a possible spy until he's able to tell he's an American paratrooper, and then he lands with the infantry on D-Day. So that was his first parachute jump. He then does a second parachute jump on Operation Market Garden, and then he becomes the only member of Easy Company to do a third jump. There was another guy in Easy Company who does 3 jumps, but not all of them with Easy Company, a chap called Lewis Nixon. This guy does 3 parachute jumps with Easy Company. His third is into Bastogne. So the Battle of the Bulge, when they're all weighed down by fog, no one can see anything, and the German units are pushing back the 101st. He parachutes into it so that when the fog lifts, he can light it all up. Only 20 people did that, and he was one of them. So Carl Fenstermaker does those 3 parachute jumps, and then he is, as a German speaker, utilized by the American military on the liberation of Dachau, the concentration camp. because he's a German speaker and he can speak to all the inmates and any guards about what on earth is happening there. There's a book by Ed Shames about Shames's role in the war, and he talks about using Carl Fenstermaker in a translator's role. And a lot of the accounts post-war say that that is what did for Carl. He survives the war, but wasn't able to hold a job down at the end of the war, and he dies in the 1980s, relatively young. He does turn up at a lot of the reunions in Philadelphia, or in Pennsylvania rather, because a lot of the guys from Easy Company were based there. So Garnier, Wild Bill Garnier was from there. Dick Winters was from there. They used to meet up. But I think Carl Fenstermaker was incredibly affected by not necessarily his military fighting, but by what he saw at Dachau, and I think suffered quite tremendously after the war. And for me, that makes him a bit of a sort of a poster boy for Operation Nightingale, because he had no necessarily physical wounds from the conflict and the fighting he'd been through, but certainly was mentally scarred by what he'd seen. And a lot of my veterans who are working in Oldbourne, in your village, have had exactly the same experience, and they can empathize. And that's why I think working on this Easy Company, the Band of Brothers project, is so powerful and effective, because the guys I work with can really see themselves in what they're excavating, not just the material that they're finding, but in the people that they're finding. This is a nice image. This is Carl Fenstermaker here in America on his parachute training. This is Forrest Guth. It's a really Guth, and it, you know, you couldn't design this sort of thing, that you're looking for the hut which Forrest is posing in front of, and you find the dog tag of one of his best mates. They're just incredible. And here he is again in front of his Sky Train. These are the pathfinders in front of their Dakota, and this is Fenstermaker. When we do this field work, we're lucky enough to be able to welcome American visitors, American guests from the World War II Museum from New Orleans who've come over on a couple of occasions. We're able to show them around, and I think it's hopefully really valuable for them to see where these soldiers were living prior to the maelstrom of Normandy. We're also happy enough to have Willis Jeeps and these trucks turning up, and we're able to show our guests the various bits that survive of Easy Company. And then, of course, this year, the amount of material we're able to show of the paratroopers was phenomenal. But we're also able to bring some of the actors involved. So Tim Matthews here on the right, he's a stalwart. He's been a few times. He's camped with us. He plays Pencala in the TV series. He was blown up in Bastogne, the real soldier. Tim is actually very healthy. We watched the TV series with him in the Memorial Hall. And this is another of the actors. His character lived next to Dick Winters, Harry Welsh. So he lived next to Dick Winters above your post office in the village. And here he is, Rick is signing away for one of our veterans. So this is Big Jack, one of our Yorkshire Regiment people, who is a collector, anything you can think of connected with Band of Brothers. So if we get an actor on site, that's him done. He's not doing any more work because he's going to pester these two for autographs. We also had Doc from the series around Bastogne. He visited and he led one of the tours for New Orleans, and an incredible friendly character, again, very generous in signing Jack's autograph book and Jack's t-shirts and Jack's everything. So very, very, very nice. And I think that's really good that it's another facet we're able to bring to it all. I think I'm going to close simply with what we're hoping to do this year. Hopefully you all recognize that logo. We're intending to be back here in May, 2nd to the 10th, I think, top of my head, and Time Team are going to film it. So Time Team do still exist. So you will see Tony Robinson in the village, Carenza Lewis in the village, and we are going to record our fieldwork this year, so you can get it on the internet as a program. It'll also be available in America too, which is important. And we are looking for a hut used by Fox Company, a hut used by Easy Company, and anything else connected with the Americans, and indeed the Brits, and indeed the squatters on your football pitches. I've shamelessly put this thing up because I'm trying to raise money to bring 2 American servicemen over. There's going to be a mixed team this year. Hopefully there'll be some Ukrainians. There'll be some serving American from the American bases in the UK. I'm trying to bring a veteran of the recent campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq over from the States, one who's 10th Mountain Division from New York, and another is 101st Airborne. So one of the successors of Easy Company coming over here. So there's this begging page I put together to fund their flights and their Chinese takeaway bill and their Crown and Blue Boar bill and all the other things. So if you get a chance to have a look at that, anything would be incredibly welcome. And then when it comes to June, you can read a little bit more about it, but in connection with all the other excavations that my phenomenal veterans have done over the decade plus that we've worked overseas. If the words are rubbish, because I wrote them, at least the photographs will be good. So Harvey took them, and there are illustrations and a foreword by Alice Roberts. So it'll look good if nothing else. But Oldbourne has its own chapter in there, so you will be able to read about the American paratroopers. And if you get the next issue of Current Archaeology, the 2022 dig should be in there as well. So that's it from me. Do come along and say hello to me and my vets in 2023 in May. It's not long to go. You've made us incredibly welcome the previous 2 years, and I know that'll be the same this year. But if you see a load of really scruffy people covered in mud, that'll be us. Do come along and say hello and just see what we found and visit the museum and see all the things we found in previous years. Thank you very much.